When I first started playing my Victorian Sims 2 challenge, this was the very first time I had ever actually played with the Sun and Moon packs. Ada and Maxwell helped me discover the joy of cows and pigs in this game, and boy was I excited about the cows. They also decided to have a baby right off the bat because I knew the mortality rolls were going to be pretty bad. So we end up with our first baby girl, Alma Clementine. And Ada wasn't exactly proving to be the best mother in the neighborhood, but you know, the baby was fed, and it wasn't long before Ada was pregnant again. And we actually ended up adopting some chickens as well. Alma ages up into a toddler fairly quickly, and she's absolutely adorable. And it's when she is a toddler that we end up having our second baby, and it's another baby girl. We end up with Emma Breyer Price. Gosh, these girls feel so long ago. And unfortunately, in the very first few rotations, we end up having a robber come and steal some of our cows as well, because the first thing that robbers always take in this challenge are the animals, which, like, honestly is probably doing them a service, because if you've seen my streams, you know how bad I am at taking care of the animals. Alma ages up into a child with pretty minimal fare and fare, of course, in the smallest room in the house, as happens, and because she is the eldest in a fairly lower class house, she ends up doing a lot of the cleaning. Now, we end up having to rebuild the whole neighborhood, and that means a bit of a makeover for the house. Unfortunately, the makeover doesn't last long before we then lose some of our stuff to the repo man. Unfortunately, Alma's not exactly taking that very well. Things are just a little bit chaotic, and Emma ages up into a child very poorly, about as poorly as can be when it comes to The Sims 2, honestly, which I feel bad about, but you know, it was a rough life. They were busy all the time, and they had a lot to work on. Now, we still need an heir, so at this point, we have Ada and Maxwell continuing to try for an heir, and we almost lose the baby, which is terrifying, but thankfully it doesn't end in a miscarriage. Now, we eventually do open up our very first butcher shop. Of course, the only thing that we really can afford to sell is chickens at the moment. And we also have Georgina becoming friends with the girls. So these are kind of the oldest people of Generation 2 at the time, and so it makes a lot of sense that they would be friends. They're kind of the only ones in the neighborhood, after all. And Emma does prove in this early age to be more of an introvert. We also realize that apparently I can't take care of pregnant Sims, and we almost lose the baby again, but not before Alma ages up into a teenager. Now, this is exciting because we can start to, like, marry her off. Because they're still really in the lower class, I don't really do proper arranged marriages yet, but there she is, and the house gets a bit of an upgrade thanks to some of the benefits from opening their own store and business. So you can see the house looks really nice. They're proper lower middle class at this point, I would say. And Alma ends up meeting Hector Vladimir Holloway. Now, the Holloways are one of the wealthiest families in town, but he is not the heir, so he's not the most eligible bachelor, but that's okay because the Prices aren't the most eligible women in town. Now, the storefront is going really well. You can see that it's getting bigger, and we are continuing to have some morning sickness, which quickly leads to the actual pregnancy. Alma and Hector end up becoming fast friends and enjoying each other's company fairly well. So at this point, I'm very much certain that we're going to end up having a little marriage. They have a little crush between each other, and this is good, and you will find out why. So Ada goes into labor and has finally a little baby boy. So this is Marcus Wyatt. He is our heir, and we reach level 5 of our business, which means we can take the money and run. And boy, do they take the money and run with the house. So they don't spend their money like they should and put it into the business. They put it straight into the house to elevate their social class, if that tells you the priorities of the Prices. This is the Holloway house. It's one of the first houses I built on stream, which was really fun. And we have Hector and Alma get engaged really quick. They've kind of already been courting, so we all knew this was, you know, going to happen. We go ahead and get them married, and that's our first marriage of the entire challenge because our 3 main couples already came to us married. And Alma is really happy to be marrying into wealth. However, Hector is not particularly happy about being married in general. You see that he has some fighting with his brother. And I think he has some negative feelings about not being heir. But nonetheless, they end up with a really, really cute little farmhouse. It's not even that little. It's actually quite big. Although it's scantily decorated on the inside. Emma also ages up, and she is a little knowledge sim. One of the few, because I swear I make everyone in the early challenge a family sim, but that's okay. We come to work on fixing that, kind of. Marcus ages up into a toddler, and Emma meets a new friend as a child. You see that a little bit more in the Jung episode. This is Edmund. They actually grow into romantic interests from childhood friends, which is really nice to see. Although Edmund has some proper complicated feelings about marrying into this family because they are wealthier than the Jungs. And you can see that he has feelings for Emma. He just feels nervous. Ada is still very pregnant, and again, this is her 4th pregnancy, I would say. And she goes into labor, and we have another little girl. So this is Sophronia Gale. We call her Sophie. Sophie's probably one of my favorite Sims, but I just wanted to pop over to Alma's house and kind of show you. Her mom comes to help out. She actually has her first baby. This is Eleanor Jade. Unfortunately, Eleanor is going to be the only baby that we actually have for poor Alma because she dies in childbirth of eclampsia. You can see that her husband is absolutely distraught by this, and, you know, the fact that she leaves her baby girl without a mother is just horrible. So here's Eleanor as a toddler. Back at the main house, these two are working on another kid because, you know, heir and a spare, and right now we've got a lot of girls. Also, Philippa stops by and becomes friends with Emma. They actually stay friends for quite a while. And it's time for Sophie to age up into a toddler. And she's absolutely adorable. Marcus is showing off some of his true colors by not exactly being the best brother. And it's at this point that we have probably one of the most tragic experiences of the challenge. Right after we lose dear Alma, we almost lose Ada because she was dumb and decided to start cleaning the bathroom in the middle of a fire. But she actually survives the flames multiple times. Like, she should be dead. And it's at this point that I realize she's probably pregnant, and I don't think pregnant Sims can die in the fire. However, who we do not save is Maxwell. Unfortunately, we lose Maxwell in the fire, and you can see that Grimm is proper disappointed in my simming skills, and gosh, you can't blame him because this is the second fire, devastating fire of the challenge. So we're gonna have to completely rebuild like the entire first floor. You can see that we've lost pretty much everything. And we do have a little funeral service for Maxwell. You can see the ladies are in mourning. So I give him a really pretty grave just because he is a founder. And lo and behold, literally the second we get back to the main house, we end up with another repo man situation. However, life moves on, and Sophie ages up into a child. And gosh, she's adorable. I give her some kind of lighter hair just to be a little reminiscent of her mom's red hair. And we now have the baby. This is Teresa. This is the baby that she was pregnant with during the fire and that we didn't realize until the fire. She was pregnant with. Marcus ages up into a teen and, of course, survives the plight of a billion family Sims in my neighborhood. And he's not exactly the happiest Sim, but he does help out with Teresa's birthday. So here's little Teresa. She actually looks a lot like Marcus. We then enter our first vignette season. of the prices. Sophie works on her piano. We also have finally finished rebuilding the house. It's starting to look like a home again, and it's a little bit fancier because we had managed to save up some of our money. Also, yes, you will hear my baby screaming. She's fine. This is how she plays. So they have a nice little like dining room now. Everything is really pretty, but life is still hard without Maxwell. At the end of the day, it's a farm and it's only being run by one woman and her teenage children. And that's a lot of pressure on Marcus, but it's a lot of work for Ada. Meanwhile, Molly Clark is across the town preparing to move into the main Price house. You can see that the Clark household is very cramped and very small, so Molly is excited to get out and start her new job. Her mom is also really excited for her. I mean, an employment with the Prices is nothing to balk at, for sure. So things continue to move on in the business. Now Ada is really running it by herself because her teenagers are in school. They are lower middle class now. I would say proper middle class, actually. And they have their first calves of the challenge, which are my first calves ever, which I was super excited about. It's also time for Teresa to age up into a child, which I feel like everyone in the household is so invested in Teresa because of the fact that she was like the death baby for her father. Edmund ends up fighting with Molly, although Edmund really fights everyone at the party. He's struggling a lot. Here's Teresa. She's adorable. They can now afford spectacles, and this is kind of the beginning of Molly and Marcus's lifelong friendship. At least what I thought was going to be a friendship, but what all of you guys called from the very beginning was not simply platonic at all. The Holloways come over and unfortunately get everyone sick because this is the beginning of another scourge. Really our first scourge, actually. And this is Victoria standing and her sister Delphine. I had a little marriage planned between Delphine and Marcus, and thankfully they actually seem to be getting along really well. They become best friends pretty quickly. Now, Sophie ages up into a teenager, and she's beautiful. I love Sophie, and I'm so excited for her to have kids because that's, what every woman aspires to in this challenge. I promise I'm actually a feminist in real life. Eleanor and her cousin, Teresa, also, I guess her aunt, maybe, end up at the first schoolhouse. However, Eleanor's home life is a little bit chaotic. We have some step-siblings because her father has remarried the lovely Kaylin Spitzig. Oh, yeah. And the babies grow up and they're all pretty good friends together. I think that's Lydia that she's playing with. And of course she has another baby and she's good friends with her father. Like, life is hard without her mom, but her stepmom is actually very nice and their home life is pretty good. She does help out with the farm quite a lot. They run the local grain farm in town, and so there's always stuff to be done in the back garden, but she still makes time for fun. Now, one day she's out in the back garden in the evening and she's helping her dad harvest some wheat. However, nearby there was an explosion at the new pottery factory and debris come flying through the air and it ends up crushing poor Eleanor Jade. So we don't really get a long time with her, and just like that, Alma's entire bloodline is taken away from her. So you can see that the entire household is distraught by the loss of Eleanor as well. Marcus, it kind of begins his cranky era. However, despite being a real cranky bean, he ends up courting Delphine pretty well. Honestly, like, Delphine has more patience than anyone in this entire neighborhood. Like, she's perfect for Marcus, which is what makes their entire romance so tragic, but we'll get to that later. So he ends up proposing to Delphine in the St. Philip's Gardens, and they have a beautiful little proposal by the water fountain. Sophie gets a new, more adult makeover, because that's what I do after 7 days in challenge. They are effectively young adults after 7 days as teenagers. She meets Albert Harvey, and her mom does a little painting. They actually spend a lot of time in St. Philip's Gardens, and Sophie becomes friends with Philippa as well, because Philippa tries to be friends with pretty much everyone. Now here we have Teresa meeting Charlotte Holloway. This is another start to a lifelong friendship. At least it starts out as a friendship, and they meet at school, and I absolutely love these two. They're fast friends, they get along swimmingly, and it's then time for Teresa to age up into a teenager. Of course, she has her friend over. The Holloways, so this is Georgina, she's now married into the family. The Holloways aren't really getting along with the Prices. I'm not sure what's happening, but here's Teresa as a teenager. I'm obsessed with her. She's wonderful. We also end up with a new community lot in town. This is the, I think the Price Stables. And we have some fun little activities they can do. They can fish in the pond, but we also have horses, which is really exciting because they're really the first, they're the first horses in the entire town. And so Ada actually ends up spending quite a lot of time with the horses. Back at the main household, this feud over, I don't even know what, but the last few times that we've had any of the Holloways over, they've been fighting with the Prices. So there's some kind of feud happening, which is maybe related to the fact that we lost Alma. Like, they were mad. They thought maybe Alma was already sick or something when she married their son. I don't know. But Teresa ends up sneaking out late at night with Charlotte. So Teresa was like the last person I expected to be rebellious, but you know, you can't always predict it. Ada ages up into an elder, and she looks proper, dignified, and lovely, and I'm obsessed with her. And we've got piglets! And we lose some cows, because of course we did. Marcus ages up into an adult, and he looks very nice and very handsome, and that means it's time that maybe we get Marcus married, and we start thinking about the third generation. Of course, Molly is the same age as Marcus, and so she ages up into an adult as well. Unfortunately, she ages up really, really poorly. And so Molly isn't exactly enjoying her time as an adult at this household. I think the reality of the fact that her best friend is going to get married soon is a little hard for her. We also update the house a little bit. We end up with a third story. Now, Molly ends up spending a lot of her time crying. Sophie, of course, is really empathetic and notices that Molly is upset. And so Sophie ends up really befriending Molly, their new maid, and they get along really, really well. However, Marcus is kind of oblivious. So at this point, it's kind of obvious to Sophie and Molly that Molly has feelings for Marcus, but Marcus really only has eyes for Delphine at the moment. He's kind of like pushed Molly aside as he's gotten engaged, and now as he's getting married at St. Philip's Garden, the same place where they got engaged. So we have all the family over. We even have some Clarks here. I don't know why the Clarks are there. And you can see that Delphine is absolutely excited to be married into wealth. And so we have our pretty little wedding. Now, it's also at this wedding that Charlotte Holloway and Teresa realize that they are more than friends. So they develop crushes on each other, and I'm absolutely obsessed with them, honestly. Marcus and Delphine waste no time getting to work on Generation 3, and I don't know about you, but I can't wait. So lo and behold, Delphine gives birth to her first baby, And it's such an exciting affair for everyone in the household. I mean, the potential of a new heir, right? So here is the baby. It's not an heir. Her name is Leonora. It's our first girl. And how exciting. So Sophie ends up catching Molly kind of watching Delphine and Marcus from the window with a really sad expression. And she's like, listen, they are married now. I know you've had a girlhood crush on my brother all this time, but you gotta get over it because he's happily married and they have a baby. And we're also of a social class now where we can't really risk a scandal because it affects everyone. And so Molly is really upset, and Marcus notices that she's upset and ends up realizing that he has feelings for her while she gets sick. He notices that she's possibly got consumption and is really worried for her health, and so it's kind of at that moment that he's like, oh gosh, I could lose Molly. She's been more than my best friend for basically my whole life. And of course Sophie catches on and is just like, oh my god, please stop. But of course this still doesn't stop Marcus. Leonora ages up into a toddler and she's absolutely adorable. It's also time for Sophie to age up into an adult. So Sophie is a little bit upset at aging into an adult, but you know, it's okay because her, oh, don't grab that, her lifelong friend Albert is deciding to court her. We end up having some upgrades to the storefront as well as a new tea shop in town. So Sophie and Albert end up kind of having a little date. Their chaperone Ada is off catching butterflies in the yard, so she's not exactly being the best chaperone, but honestly I think that's a little bit intentional just to give them a bit of privacy because she knows that Sophie is on the demure side and really kind of needs the extra push. Leonora ages up into a child, which is so exciting. She's adorable. I love her bright red hair. And here she is as a child. I mean, gosh, she's so cute. And then it's also time for Delphine to have her baby. Now, she ends up having their heir. This is Julian Rupert, but they waste no time having more. So they go ahead and start trying again. Meanwhile, Julian ages up into a toddler with the help of his aunt Sophie before she gets married and moves out. Despite some of the tension about Marcus, Molly and Sophie are still best friends. However, Molly and Marcus kind of sit down to have a talk about what's happening, and unfortunately the talk doesn't exactly stay a talk, if you know what I mean. And they end up kind of making out on the couch at night while everyone else is asleep. Oh, these two. They drive me absolutely crazy. I mean, is it my own fault? Yes, but that's another story. So it's time for Sophie to get married, and she's very excited, but not as excited as Albert is. Albert's a Harvey to be marrying into wealth. The Harveys are definitely middle class, but a little bit more lower middle class than them. Delphine goes into labor and has not one baby, but two. And we end up with Prudence and Lilith, twin girls, although they don't look anything alike, which is kind of fun. Leonora also ages up into a teenager, and I just wanted to pop over and show you Sophie and Albert's adorable little cottage. It's very small. Eventually they get some chickens, but it mostly just has a little garden. Back at the main house, Molly and Marcus are not being particularly careful. In the most ridiculous span of drama, Delphine falls asleep in her food, and these two end up sleeping together and in their marriage bed too, like, of course. Julian ages up into a child. He is super cute. He looks a lot like both of his parents. And Delphine, although she doesn't know what's happening with Marcus, she has no idea that he's actually having an affair, ends up spending most of her time worrying around the house. I mean, there's good things happening too, like there's her twins aging up. We have Lilith here, the little redhead, and her sister Prudence, who looks exactly like Marcus. But she spends most of her energy kind of funneling all of her anxiety into her daughter's marriage market situation. However, Leonora is a little bit of a spitfire, so she has a lot of opinions about who she will and will not marry, and she is best friends with Gregory Westerfield. Gregory's family is part of the intellectual salon. It's a little bit ironic because of that he ends up fighting with Marcus because Leonora shares her concerns about her dad having an affair with the maid, considering the fact that people in intellectual salons tend to have a lot of affairs, but that's neither here nor there. He is very protective of his friend because Leonora is really his best friend at this point, but Marcus, of course, it's a little bit of a tricky situation because he's like essentially fist fighting someone's dad. Molly ends up beginning to show that she is pregnant, and this is a huge problem. So although I think Ada's not very oblivious. I imagined that Ada probably knew what was going on in her house. I mean, she's old, she's seen it all, right? So Molly moves out. Leonora is very proud of her dad for allowing this to happen, but Marcus is really upset about the prospect of losing his childhood best friend and, you know, potentially his child as well. However, right after she moves out, we end up losing Ada, and Ada's really the only one other than Leonora who knows what's going on in the household, so she died before she could even kind of get a handle on everything and sort of deal with the chaos that is her son. The twins age up into children, and with Molly out of the house, things are going back a little bit more to normal with her parents, and so Leonora is turning more into a disgusted normal teen at her parents' PDA. So here are the girls. They've aged up into kids, and they spend a lot of time hanging out in the nursery and the front nursery. And we also have cousin Edgar. I at first assumed that Edgar started this fight because as a kid, Edgar starts a lot of fights at the school and stuff. But it turned out it was Julian fighting Lilith. So Gregory spends a lot of time here. I don't know why he is still allowed in this household, considering the fact that Marcus is the one running the house and he could kick him out at any time. Delphine doesn't know what's going on. She is just beside herself that her husband is fist fighting a teenager. But, you know, the whole house is really kind of in distress at the moment. The kids are fighting each other. We end up having the funeral service for Ada as well, and the kids are all fighting at the funeral service, which is just delightful. Molly moves into Mary Jung's old apartment and ends up having a little girl. This is Brooke. Brooke looks just like her mom. She's so cute. Charlotte also ends up as a teacher at the convent. So I kind of imagined the convent as a place of refuge for a lot of LGBTQ women in the neighborhood who aren't comfortable being out in society with their partners. And so she can be employed by the convent but not actually a participating member in the religion. And so she ends up getting Teresa to move in with her as they're both teachers, and they can kind of live out their lives in quiet happiness away from public eye together. So that's really lovely for them. Back at the main house, Julian's still fighting everyone. It's an absolute nightmare. But Leonora is starting to take up some ballet with her good friend Marion. Leonora and Marion are pretty good friends. And we also end up having a party at the main house. You can see that everyone's having a blast. We've got all of our classics here. We have Daisy, we have the Holloways, we have the Averys, we have Septimus, most of the Kings. And the party is actually for Julian because it's his teenage birthday. Now, teenage birthdays are probably like my favorite of the birthdays because you really get to see what they look like as like adults kind of. And he ages up with the grumpy trait, which is actually possibly my worst nightmare. Leonora sees Gregory flirting with Flora and feels really upset because she just kind of assumed that he wouldn't be flirting with girls in front of her. He's kind of stringing her on. It's a little bit of a situation like Cedric Cunningham and Faye. Like, he has no intention of marrying, but he's still kind of stringing her along because he's treating them just as friends, but it's a whole ordeal. Leonora gets kind of thrust into a little bit of a courtship with Cecil, and she's not happy about it. So she and Marcus are fighting quite a lot right now. She's also fighting with Delphine, and so she spends some time working at the shop with her father, but ultimately he just sends her home because she's being such a problem. And so you can see that she and Delphine are not happy. She feels like Cecil is just too nice and too boring, and yeah, I really tried. I did. So it's the twins' teenage birthdays, and they are adorable. And Sophie eventually goes over to see Molly again. She feels bad that she hasn't been around for so long, but she didn't completely know where Molly had moved to, and Molly didn't really let her know. Molly had a lot of guilty feelings about having had an affair with Sophie's brother. So she ends up moving in as the maid of all work with her daughter Brooke. At the Harvey residence. Now, this isn't the main Harvey residence, this is Sophie and Albert's house. And we end up having a little affair over here at the main house. We've got some portraits, and probably one of the worst portraits that I've ever had in my life comes from this ordeal. Teresa and Charlotte are very comfortable being together around their family and close relations, which is really, really lovely. And everyone is just having a good time. The Prices are known around town for having really just fun parties. And it's not just like proper slow court dancing. Now, the party is for Leonora. She ages up into an adult, and Harrison Lawson actually kind of eyes Leonora at the party and wants to dance with her. Of course, at first Leonora is like, absolutely not. I have no interest in you, because she's, you know, interested in Cedric, but Cedric hasn't even been around. He's not even at her party. And she is just a little bit tired of waiting on him. So eventually she does agree to dance with him. Now, Delphine also ages up into an elder. Unfortunately, she ages up really poorly, although this isn't exactly a surprise considering the fact that she's been crying for like her entire adulthood. And Harrison ends up coming over the next day to ask her parents for her hand in marriage. So this is a bit of a surprise to them because, well, no one's actually managed to get this far with Leonora because she just constantly says no. However, Harrison witnesses some ridiculous encounters between these two where this is where they start fighting. Like, they were totally fine when Delphine was an adult, but now that she is an elder, they're just constantly fighting each other. Like, they'll kiss and make up and then fight again, and then like it gets to the point where Marcus is looking semi-abusive. Like, it's really bad. So at the butcher shop one day, Leonora is here helping her dad, and Marcus meets Brooke for the first time. So he starts kind of asking her some questions like, you look familiar, who's your mom and stuff, and Leonora sees. And Leonora is really smart. She pieces it together very quickly. Marcus also ages up into an elder in aspiration failure. It's a bit of a nightmare. And cranky Julian ends up fistfighting his cousin. This is Rainier Harvey, and Rainier is Sophie's son. Oh my gosh, it's so ridiculous. So we go out into the world with these two. So we have another like proper little date. It's at the winery, and this is where Harrison decides he wants to ask Leonora to marry him. They've been courting for a little while and it's going well, and Leonora's been a little less spicy towards him. Like, she really has proper like ginger cat energy. And she's actually excited, and she agrees to marry Harrison. Honestly, I wasn't sure it was ever going to happen because I was throwing matches at her and she was just throwing them right back at me. But, you know, I mean, Harrison is a Lawson. It's a good marriage. He may not be the heir to the Lawson estate, but he's still a very eligible bachelor. So Molly and Sophie are kind of beside themselves because Marcus ends up visiting unexpectedly. He didn't realize that Molly was living with Sophie. No one told him, and so he is just livid, absolutely livid. And he also wanted to be part of Brooke's life, and Molly kind of kept that from him. Brooke sees what's happening and doesn't really realize what they're fighting about, but it's clear that Marcus is very upset, and after everyone else goes to bed, she sees Marcus in their living room crying. It's a bit of a nightmare. So the Prices end up actually purchasing a hunting lodge, and this is sort of the first little recreational house that anyone in the neighborhood has bought. They had a lot of money saved up, and instead of actually spending it on the main house, elevating to another social class, they spend it on a hunting lodge instead. And I just thought that would be a really fun thing, because in the 19th century, hunting and archery and stuff was very popular for sport. But the first event we have here isn't actually hunting. It's Leonora and Harrison's wedding. Now, Harrison at this point, he started off as an architect, but he has actually been recently elected mayor. So unbeknownst to Leonora, when he started courting her, she actually married a very important sim in town, and they are pretty happy because they're each marrying well into wealth. It's also a very poorly planned wedding on my part, because everyone has to stand on the other side of the pond, but hey, I guess it gives them some privacy. So we have a little toast and everyone celebrates the happy bride. And this is actually where the Avery's daughter Marion ends up meeting Julian for the first time. I also had a complete headcanon when I realized that this is where Daisy met Cecil for the first time. Oh my gosh, it all comes together. I had no idea how that happened. Marcus is crying and stuff in the marriage chambers, and Albert has to come in and be like, man, you gotta leave. This is not okay. So they do end up getting to consummate the marriage, and Julian and Marion actually hit it off really, really quickly. They get kind of caught up in the spirit of everything, and even as a teenager, Julian ends up proposing to Marion. So they're really cute. I mean, she's a great match. Marion should be a king level match, honestly, because the Averys are so wealthy. So here is the little cottage that Harrison and Leonora move into. It's really, really small, because they just didn't have a ton saved up for their dowry, but it's enough for now. So Lilith, Prudence, and Delphine actually end up going over to the more poor part of town. They go to Cheapside to pass out some food to the poor. Unfortunately, as you can see, it doesn't exactly go very well, and they're absolutely traumatized by the rats and cockroaches. And when they try and give gifts of food to the poor, they are absolutely offended. And so Hiram O'Neilly, this is Della's son, sees what's happening and realizes he needs to intervene. So Prudence is really upset, and Hiram is like, hey, I mean, you had good intentions, but I think this isn't maybe the best way of going about it. Eventually he's able to convince her, listen, you can do this again, but you gotta let them come to you. You can't come to their place of home and work and disrupt them and insult them by giving them food. And so Della ends up talking to Delphine and kind of expressing the same sentiments. It goes a little bit better between those two. We also end up getting a new maid of all work because we have so much stuff to do around the house. This is Elsie Sully. Now, Elsie has grown up on a farm. She's never exactly, lived in this kind of upper class house, and so she doesn't exactly know the social boundaries, and so she's a little rough around the edges, but they realize that they need the help, and if she doesn't work out, they can just fire her. So they end up giving Elsie the job. So here she is, dressed up as the maid of all work. Honestly, we could use a couple maids in this household, but one is expensive enough as it is. So we also have the priest for the new town come to visit as well. So Marcus ends up going to visit Molly again now that they're both elders, and he reveals that he's put a sizable endowment down for Brooke to attend the new finishing school. Molly is very upset because he did this without asking her, but at heart she knows that it was a good thing to do because it can help secure Brooke's future. So he doesn't reveal who he is to Brooke, but he does ask how she would like to, first thing in the morning, go to the finishing school. Now, Brooke grew up essentially as a maid. She had no idea that this was even going to be possible. She doesn't understand why this mysterious benefactor gave her money, but she is nonetheless excited. So Philippa and her grandson Marius end up coming to visit the main Price household at like 7 a.m. So literally the only person even really dressed to receive anyone is Lilith. So she goes and she greets Philippa and Marius, and it's at this point that I realize they're matching, and so naturally they need to get married, right? Like, isn't that the only logical conclusion? These two are still really hot and cold. It's not going well. I don't know what happened. I think Marcus has a lot of guilt that he's just really struggling with. We also end up having an actual hunting party at the hunting lodge where we invite a lot of local Sims, and really this was so I could play with the new archery mod. These two continue to make absolute fools of themselves in front of all of their friends and family by fighting and bickering in front of everyone. It's not good at all. But it turned out that women were actually allowed to practice archery in this era, and so I was really excited to do that. We also have a little duel between Perry and Archibald. I think they're Clarks, and I don't know why they're fighting, but one of them dies. I think Archibald dies. We get back to the main household, and Julian and Elsie are not getting along. It's absolutely awful. Literally the second I leave them unattended, they are fighting. And so Julian ages up into an adult really so cranky. I mean, do you see this? Like, he's excited, but he's got the angry stance, you know? I don't know what to do with him. He's like the worst sim I've ever had in my life. He's always unhappy because he can't do anything like skill wise, so he can't even like effectively make money. And here he is as an adult. He looks quite dashing. It's such a shame his personality is horrible. So we're having a little wedding for Julian and Marion. They've been married for a while, but I wanted to wait, or they've been engaged for a while, but I wanted to wait until Julian was an adult to actually get them married. And so the Avery family is from Haiti, and I didn't think that Haitians actually used white dresses in this era. So I gave her green because I thought it looked good on her, but please correct me if I'm wrong because I didn't do research. And so you look so happy to be married, Julian. So happy. We end up having a little wedding reception at the main household afterwards, where Elsie continues to fight not only Julian, but now Delphine. As the woman of the house, Delphine is kind of responsible for keeping her maids in check, and it's not going well in the slightest, and so it's kind of at this point that we realize she needs to move out. Like, this is not okay. I then decide to hop over to the convent lot just so we can move Charlotte and Teresa out, because I was going to have them work at the boarding school when we have a fire. Now, this fire was so inconvenient to my plot that I let them use fire extinguishers. However, you see that we still lost Charlotte. So like, I cheated, and I cheated very ineffectively again. So we end up just moving Teresa alone and in mourning to the new finishing school, and we only have two people working here. This is Marcella. She is the headmistress and the librarian. She's based on one of our lovely simmers, and she's got hearing trumpets, which I was obsessed with when Alice of Cupcakey and Simberry fame made those. So we have a pretty small class. It's really just the Prices, Brooke, and Eliza Harvey. So ironically, everyone here is actually related. Now, we end up using the genie lamp to get a little bit of money because I'm allowing them to do that now that they're really in the upper class. Marion ends up pregnant with her first baby, and we also get another new community lot. This is the Hartley Waters. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm obsessed with this build. Like, making gardens is one of my favorite things. So I hit a breaking point with these two because I can't even keep them distracted long enough not to like stop fighting. And so we end up having to fire and move out Elsie. This is Anne Marshall. There was no one that Julian got along with well enough to actually hire a new maid, so I had to make Anne Marshall. So congrats, they got a custom made. We also have a little musical performance where Marius and Lilith end up kind of spending some more time together. They have a little bit of unchaperoned time out in the back gardens, which ends up pretty harmless, but you know, I mean, it's still not great given their social classes. And with the extra money we got, we did redecorate and kind of remodel the house a little bit. So here it is. We kind of like switched where the kitchen was, so the kitchen can be a little bit bigger, and really ended up flipping it with a room we added on completely for the parlor. It's time for Marion to have her first baby boy. So this is Raphael Tillman. Rafi is going to be our heir, which is super exciting. And Julian continues to be an aspiration failure the whole time. Like, I don't know how Marion has the patience for this man, but she somehow does. You can see that Marcus is absolutely livid with his son because he's acting like such an embarrassment, but it's hilarious because Marcus is also an embarrassment. We also have a baptism because we do switch denominations, or we switch parishes for them, so they are now part of St. Catherine's Cathedral Parish. These two get ahead on having another baby. Meanwhile, we also end up losing Delphine. You can see that Delphine is not exactly ready to go. She's very upset. And Marcus is also upset too, as he should be. So Raphael's birthday comes around, and it's time to age him up into a toddler. And my gosh, guys, I think he is so adorable. And of course, because my luck is just fantastic, we have another robbery which happens, and then it's actually also time right after the robbery, because of course it is, for Marion to give birth to twin boys. We have Grant and Wentworth, and we've literally at the same exact time that we're giving birth, Marcus also dies. I don't know why this keeps happening to my Sims, but like as soon as someone gives birth, someone dies. This has happened so many times. So that's the end of generation 2 for these guys, which is really wild. We have Raphael age up into a child, and we end up meeting up with Leonora and her family. You can see her daughter Josephine and her other daughter Lisette. Everyone's really upset. I find that Harrison is on the sensitive side, and I think he's just really upset for his wife to, you know, lose her father, even though he knows they have a complex relationship. So then it's revealed by the local lawyer, Nathaniel, that their father left a sizable sum to Brooke, and reveals that Brooke is actually his daughter. Brooke doesn't handle this news particularly well and ends up fighting with Eliza Harvey. I was really shocked it was Eliza that she fights with, because Eliza is Sophie's daughter. They grew up together. So they have a no fighting tolerance policy, and she ends up having to move back home. Then it's time for twins Lilith and Prudence to age up into adults. And here they are. Here's Prudence. Lilith pretty much looks like exactly the same. But Brooke arrives home and is distraught to see that her mother is mourning the loss of the man she now understands to be her father. And with that, we end season 1.